Put your hand next to a stranger's hand right now, in your head. Different shade, right? Here's the thing nobody tells you. Your body still thinks it's in Africa. Every single cell in your skin is still running code that was written for a completely different planet than the one you're standing on. And it has no idea it's wrong. Let's take a step back for a second, because this is going to get strange fast. If you could time travel back 300,000 years and line up every human alive on Earth side by side, you would see one thing. Just one. Dark skin, not most people, not the majority, everyone. There was no light skin anywhere on the planet, not a single person. The very idea of pale skin did not exist yet in the human species. Okay? Stop. Let that sink in. Every civilization you've ever read about, every king, every myth, every face carved into a temple wall, all of it eventually traces back to people who looked nothing like a significant chunk of humanity today. So something happened. Something enormous. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the reason isn't beauty, isn't culture, isn't chance. It's a war. A silent, multi-front, 100,000-year war being fought on your skin between two things that should never have been enemies: the sun and a vitamin. Here's the part that should mess with your head a little. Your skin is not a wrapper. It's not the bag your organs came in. It's an organ, your largest one, and it's running a defense system so specific that scientists are still finding new layers to it. One of its core jobs is blocking ultraviolet radiation, which sounds abstract until you understand what UV actually does. It shreds DNA. It causes mutations. Enough of those mutations in the wrong place, and you get cancer. The pigment behind all of this, melanin, is sunscreen your body manufactures for free every single day without asking you. More melanin, darker skin, better shield. This is why, in equatorial Africa, where our species began under some of the most brutal UV exposure on the planet, evolution didn't hesitate. Dark skin wasn't a preference, it was survival, full stop. But here's the twist, and this is where most people's understanding of this story just stops. Which is a shame, because it's about to get so much weirder. UV radiation doesn't just threaten your skin, it threatens something inside your bloodstream that you've probably never thought about once in your life. Folate. Folate is a B vitamin, and it does something during pregnancy that is almost unbelievably important. It builds the neural tube in a developing embryo, the structure that becomes the brain and spine. Without enough folate in the first few weeks, sometimes before a woman even knows she's pregnant, that structure can fail to close. The results are catastrophic. Miscarriage, severe birth defects. Here's the problem. UV light destroys folate. It breaks it down in the bloodstream. So in a sun-drenched, clothing-optional environment like equatorial Africa a few 100,000 years ago, women with less melanin were losing more folate, which meant more failed pregnancies, which meant fewer surviving children. Let that sink in for a second. There were two completely separate biological reasons pushing in the exact same direction. Melanin protects your DNA from cancer. Melanin protects your folate for reproduction. Two threats, one solution, and that solution was mandatory if you wanted your genes to make it to the next generation. So dark skin wasn't just useful in Africa, it was, without exaggeration, non-negotiable. Which raises an obvious question. If dark skin was this perfect, field-tested, 5-star biological weapon, why does it exist on a dial at all? Why did any of it change? Here's the answer, and it's one of the most elegant, brutal trade-offs in the entire story of our species. Somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, small groups of humans started drifting out of Africa. No announcement, no single dramatic migration, just a slow generational creep north, generation after generation, walking slightly further than their parents did. And as they moved, something about the sky itself changed. Not the sun. The sun stayed exactly as intense and indifferent as it's always been. But at higher latitudes, sunlight hits the Earth at a lower angle. It has to pass through more atmosphere to reach you. less of it gets through. Winters get long and dark, and suddenly, the exact same melanin that had been a perfect shield in Africa became something else entirely up north. A liability? Not because of cancer. UV was already weak up there, so that threat mostly disappeared. Not because of folate either, for the same reason. No, the problem here was something almost nobody talks about, and it's arguably the real main character of this entire story. Vitamin D. Your skin makes vitamin D using UVB light hitting a compound just beneath the surface. It's genuinely one of the strangest things your body does. It turns sunlight into a nutrient, like a biological solar panel. And vitamin D is not optional in the slightest. It controls how your gut absorbs calcium. Without it, bones don't mineralize properly. In children, that means rickets, bowed legs, a flattened skull. In adult women, it can soften the pelvic bones so severely that childbirth becomes life-threatening. So picture this: a person with highly efficient, cancer-blocking, folate-protecting dark skin, standing in the gray, overcast light of northern Europe 40,000 years ago. Their skin is doing exactly what it evolved to do: blocking UV. Except now, there's barely any UV worth blocking, and the little bit that does get through is the exact UV they desperately need to make vitamin D. Their skin cannot tell the difference between dangerous rays and rays their body is starving for. It just blocks everything, indiscriminately, because that's the only setting it has. Weaker bones, more rickets, more danger in childbirth. Over generations, this quietly became a death sentence, and evolution, cold and patient as always, started selecting in the opposite direction it had for hundreds of thousands of years. Lighter mutations, once useless or even harmful in Africa, suddenly started keeping people alive in the north. Slightly lighter skin, slightly more vitamin D, slightly stronger bones, slightly better odds of surviving to have children. Generation after generation, the dial kept turning. Here's something that should genuinely surprise you, because for a long time, even scientists got this part wrong. You'd assume this lightning happened gradually, smoothly, over the entire 100,000-year migration north. It didn't. Ancient DNA has completely wrecked that assumption. Early European hunter-gatherers, people who had already been living at northern latitudes for tens of thousands of years, were still dark to medium dark-skinned. The most famous example, a specimen called Cheddar Man, lived in what's now Britain around 10,000 years ago. Genetic analysis published in 2018 found he likely had dark skin, dark curly hair, and blue eyes, a combination that looks almost impossible to modern eyes, because we've been trained to associate blue eyes with the palest skin on the planet. 10,000 years ago, that wasn't the pattern at all. The extremely fair skin associated with northwestern Europe today, the kind that burns in about 12 minutes of summer sun, only spread widely in the last 6 to 8,000 years. In the full 300,000-year history of our species, that's less than the final 3%. So what actually happened 6 to 8,000 years ago to suddenly slam the accelerator down? Agriculture, the switch from hunting and gathering to farming. Here's why that mattered so much for something as seemingly unrelated as skin color. Hunter-gatherer diets were loaded with vitamin D from oily fish, organ meats, shellfish, some of the richest natural sources on the planet. Farming populations ate mostly grain, wheat, barley, oats. Their dietary vitamin D didn't dip, it collapsed. Suddenly, entire populations were almost completely dependent on whatever their skin alone could manufacture. And if that skin was still fairly dark, it simply wasn't enough anymore. And there's a second accelerant most people never hear about. Farming villages were dense and connected in ways scattered hunter-gatherer bands never were. A useful mutation in a group of 50 scattered people spreads painfully slowly. The same mutation in a farming village of hundreds, linked to other villages nearby, can spread through thousands of descendants in a handful of generations. Diet collapse plus population density essentially hit fast forward on European depigmentation, all in a window of time that is, geologically speaking, basically yesterday. Here's something else that tends to genuinely surprise people. There is no single dark skin gene and light skin gene sitting opposite each other like a light switch. Skin pigmentation is polygenic, built from dozens of different genes working together. And here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. East Asian populations and European populations both independently evolved lighter skin, but they largely use different genetic variants to get there. Different molecular routes, same destination. This is convergent evolution, and when nature reinvents the exact same solution more than once, completely independently, that's about as loud a signal as biology ever gives you that a trait truly, deeply matters for survival. So here's where all of this actually lands. Skin color, the thing that has shaped so much of human history, that's been used to build hierarchies and justify unspeakable cruelty for centuries, is, at its biological core, nothing more than a UV calibration dial. It's your body's best ancestral guess about how much sun protection you need, based on where your distant ancestors happen to stand and what they happen to eat. Light skin isn't an upgrade. In equatorial environments, it's a liability that increases cancer risk and destroys folate. Dark skin isn't primitive or unfinished. It's the ancestral default, the original setting every human being was born with for the vast majority of our species' existence. And here's the part that should actually give you chills. The exact same star that pushed some populations toward more melanin to survive its intensity also pushed other populations toward less melanin because they needed more of its limited output. The sun never picked sides. It never had an opinion. It simply radiated indifferently, the same way it always has, and let evolution sort out the consequences across every continent humans ever walked into. We built entire systems of prejudice on top of a vitamin D problem, a calcium absorption issue, a folate protection mechanism running quietly under everyone's skin the entire time. And the algorithm hasn't stopped. It's still running right now, in you, slowly, almost imperceptibly, even as sunscreen and supplements and fortified food partially disconnect your skin from the environment that originally wrote its code. Every shade of human skin alive today is the same story, told a different number of times, in a different place, under a different sky. Written in melanin is the exact record of every environment your ancestors ever stood in. Every skin tone is an answer, and every single answer was correct. Please share your thoughts on this topic in the comments. See you next time.